April 8th, 1943. 27,000 feet above Dover, the light is sharp and the air is thin, and Oberleutnant Friedrich Wilhelm Graf feels his leather helmet press into his brow, while his oxygen mask sighs like a small wind, and he lets a short, knowing smile cross his face as Feldwebel Josef Priller cracks a cold joke on the radio. Just more clumsy ironclads from the island, the laugh of men who have hunted the sky for years. Below them, squadron leader Richard Carter keeps a calm line of Spitfire Mk V fighters, Merlin's 66 engines singing through two-stage superchargers like steady hearts, Rotol props ticking as the pilots set blade pitch, and wings that carry Browning 303s and Hispano Mk second cannons tuned at Manston to meet at a single deadly braid of tracer. Close on a cockpit, the world is leather and metal and breath. The pilot feels the helmet weight, smells fuel and sweat, hears the soft pop of instruments, and knows his life rides on a thin gauge and a steady hand. In the hangars, men at Boscombe Down wrote spool-up charts, and men at Castle Bromwich stamped change notices, and those small exact acts are the bones beneath the flight. The German smirk meets the quiet math of engineering, and the thin blue asks its first question: what if the thing you laugh at is the new truth of the sky? In workshops, men bend over dyno benches with oil on their hands and lights over their shoulders, and the Merlin 66's spool-up curve glows on a paper like a promise that was paid for in sweat, and the Rotol prop hubs get checked with feeler gauges until every blade answers the same. Engineers at Castle Bromwich take a test pilot's short notes, watch torque, spool steady, and they turn those notes into jigs and torque tables so the next Spitfire behaves the same, because sameness at scale is the only way to make courage repeatable. At Manston, armourers mix AP and incendiary belts until tracer braids where the gunnery table says they must, and instructors make pilots practice 2-second bursts until the finger learns the rule. The work is not loud, but it is relentless, and factories and sheds hum like a second, slower heartbeat that keeps squadrons alive. When a pilot takes off, he carries the hands of many men on his wings. Training is a hard drum that eats mistakes and makes muscle. At Manston, pilots fly hour after hour to learn where the Merlin will pull and where the prop will bite, and they learn to treat gauges as friends and levers as commands. The helmet presses, the throat gets dry, the breath comes in small huffs when a storm of exercises comes, but after repeat practice, the hands move before thought, and reflex saves lives when a shell hits. Some men do not make it through the cut. Training losses are a ledger of grief, and commanders tone their plans with that cost. The pilot who survives comes back older in a single fight, his silence louder than his talk, his hands steady because they have been made so. First combat is a cruel teacher. In April and May of 1943, German fighters push close. They try to make the Spitfires turn where they cannot, and early hours show both loss and strange stubborn returns, planes that taxi in with skin like sieves and engines still ticking. On May 4th, a battered Spitfire limps home, canopy spidered, oil on the glass, instruments scorched, and the mechanics count holes under the lamp and mark where metal will be doubled and a control run will be rerouted. That plane is proof, not miracle, that structure and power can keep a man alive. The smell of hot metal and petrol and the quiet, grim faces in the repair shed tell the lesson plain. The machine can be wounded and still give its pilot back. That lesson moves fast, from strip to bench to line. June 26th reads like a small legend when squadrons climb into the thin air, props bite and pilots dive in the practiced rhythm they learned in the hangars, and when tracer braids the sky and a wing snaps, the camera shows the exact moment metal fails. Leaders like Group Captain Johnny Johnson and Squadron Leader Marmaduke Patel codify the move: climb, stoop, 2-second converged burst, climb away, until it is muscle and not thought, and the tactic starts to look like a machine with teeth. The gun cameras show rope-thin tracer, and the wreckage tells the tale in torn fabric and broken ribs. The enemy who once mocked goes quiet and then wary. The sky changes in small, decisive acts. The sound that men call the piano of Roosevelt is no joke when 8 Browning 303s and 2 hose-heavy Hispano cannons sing together at the right point, and when belts of metal meet a thin zone of 6 feet, the result is sudden and final. Each Spitfire carries a measured load of rounds. Each recoil is timed. Each burst is short because discipline, not waste, wins the day. In numbers, the math is simple. 3,000 plus rounds, hundreds of bullets a second. But the act is precise and terrifying. Witnesses on both sides write down that sound and remember it as a wall of iron, and the tactic that uses height, weight, and concentrated fire turns the old art of dogfighting into a sharper instrument. Men train to bring that instrument to bear and live by the rules they learned under lamps. As the weeks pass, the Spitfire family grows and learns new tricks. Rotol props are refined, Merlin maps get tuned, and variable pitch blades give quicker response so pilots can bite in and climb out like a single, living thing. Wing tanks give reach so escorts go deeper. Rockets and bomb racks make fighters into blunt hammers for groundwork. And a pilot can change a plane's job by swapping bits on the wing. The machines change and so do the tactics, and on D-Day, the sky shows what that change means. Layered cover, timed strikes, roads choked in smoke, and a tide of machines that breaks the enemy's chance to move. The war becomes as much about part lists and schedules as about a brave hand at the stick. Factories hum like small cities, lines of workers, men and women, fit skins and wire engines, and Castle Bromwich and nearby yards push out planes so that loss is not final, but a number to be met and replaced, and that steady churn is a weapon in itself. Each Spitfire is many parts and many hands, and the ability to put another plane over the field tomorrow is as much victory as any single fight. Ammunition moves in huge piles, fuel lines run like veins on maps, and logistics makes presence a fact rather than a hope. The enemy that can kill planes but cannot stop supply finds its strategy hollower by the week. Depots and repair crews are quiet heroes who work under floodlights to stitch wings and replace props, and speed of repair becomes a kind of armor. A squadron that puts planes back in the sky in hours, not weeks, blunts surprise and keeps pressure steady. Operation alerts come and go, but the hangars are always there with men who know which parts break most and how to fix them fast. A pilot who flies again the next day owes his life to hands he never sees, and the calm in his voice at briefing is the sound of trust in those hands. When jets come late in the war, the sky throws a new question at old craft, and Marine and Griffin tunes, water methanol tricks, and pilot timing make windows where speed is beatable by mass and timing. And brave men find those windows and press the fight. The fast planes shine and sing, but the trained pilots and steady machines still find ways to use angle, surprise and mass to take a jet at the right moment, and some pilots pay the price while others live to tell the tale. Adaptation continues in workshops and on the line. Through all the thunder, the human cost remains a slow drum. Names on lists, faces in mess halls, letters home folded and folded again, quiet grief in the morning. Training took lives, combat took more, and the pride of victory sits beside the weight of loss. The men who worked benches and the men who flew remember both, and their stories are stitched into the metal. We tell these stories not to glorify death, but to show the cost of craft that keeps other men alive. By spring, the ledger is clear. Pilots fewer, fuel tighter, the enemy weary, and the sky hums with Spitfires in a steady cadence that says the balance has tipped. Records and later voices admit what the air chose, that craft and production and training join to remap who owns the sky. Post-war notes from old enemies say it plainly. System beat show, supply beat flare, and that is a lesson hard learned. The historian sees the charts, and the mechanic sees the torque table, and both tell the same story. Small things decide big fights. A dyno print with a penciled note, a feeler gauge measured at midnight, a gunnery sergeant mixing belts, a pilot signing his log after a short flight. These small rituals repeat until a plane behaves like another plane, and commanders can trust numbers instead of luck. The camera loves these small acts because they make the loud things happen again and again. Craft repeats and turns chance into choice. The final image must be simple and heavy. A Spitfire under museum light, Merlin still, Rotol blade at rest, Hispano muzzles dark, and a small pile of spent 303 casings and a gun camera reel beside it. And a child can look and ask what that sound was, and a veteran can touch and remember. The sound that lingers is not only thunder, but the exact bite of prop and the braid of tracer, the music of craft. The lesson is clear. Steady hands, measured work, and brave hearts together changed the sky, and when thunder spoke, the map of war was remade. June 1940 felt like a shout across the sea, and the drawing rooms at Supermarine filled with men who knew the sky could no longer be trusted, and so they bent their heads and hands to a single urgent job, to make a fighter that could fight high where thin air had beaten others. The orders were simple and heavy: make more power, hold boost at height, keep the guns real, and do it fast. And the engineers answered with charts and sketches and long nights under lamplight. They chose the Merlin, a strong heart for the plane, and they set about changing gearboxes and ducts so the engine could breathe when the air was thin and the fight was cold. And every small choice on paper promised seconds in the sky. At Boscombe Down, test pilots climbed into cold air and watched gauges rise. They read spool-up curves and thermocouple lines like maps, and when the engine pulled steady, they wrote it down, because a steady pull at 20,000 feet is a life given back to a man in a cockpit. The work looked small: numbers, oil, a bent wrench, but those small things were the bones of a new fighter, and they would decide who lived and who fell in the wide blue tool. On May 6, 1941, the prototype rose, and the noise in the field was both fear and a kind of prayer, and pilots saw a machine that did not float like a bird, but answered like a racing heart. And they asked the simple question men ask when they meet the new: does it fly like that? Men at the dyno watched needles jump and settle, and they read the charts until their eyes were raw, because a steady spool meant the Merlin would not die in a fight, and a dead engine is the last sound a pilot will hear. The Rotol prop got its own attention: broad blades that must bite the air at the right moment, hub clearances set like fine teeth, and foremen at Castle Bromwich changed jigs to make each part the same, so that one pilot's plane would act like another's. In the workshop, the air smelled of oil and heat and late cigarettes, and the men spoke in short orders. Tighten that hub, check magneto, because every phrase was a stitch that kept the plane whole. The first climb proved the idea. Power held at height, props spun true, and the machine kept its pilot where lesser planes would cough and fall. The work at Boscombe Down was like a patient song of numbers, and engineers read spool-up curves the way a captain reads a map, because the map told where the engine would give power and where it would fail. And when the map said go, men felt less afraid. Thermocouples recorded heat, and engineers studied the beads of light like stars, and each test told them what to fix: jetting, timing, boost limits, and the exact point to push water injection if the world went hard. Castle Bromwich turned the test notes into change notices, and the change notices into jigs and tooling, so that every Mk V would leave the line with the same promise, and repetition made courage practical. Manston armourers took the guns and matched belts. They set convergence until gunners watched the tracer braid into the same thin line at the same yardage, because the pilot needs certainty where bullets decide. These were simple acts, done again and again, the quiet machine of victory. Pilots learned to read the plane as if it spoke in engine ticks and prop clicks, and a man in a cockpit hears his own heart and the Merlin's rhythm as one, and he knows that a twitch in the throttle and a choice on the prop lever will make seconds of life. The helmet is not light in those moments. The strap presses like a small judge, and the oxygen hisses and makes the world small, and the smell of fuel and sweat tells him truth. This is dangerous, but the machine will do its part if he does his. Instructors at Manston made men practice climbs and dives until their hands and eyes moved like one thing. A simple, steady task that reduces panic to action. Fear does not leave. It becomes a tool, a steady edge he uses to make the right move at the right time. The cockpit is close and loud, and yet the pilot must be calm inside because calm keeps the needle green. The early months of training were hard, and they cost lives. And records show the dark line of accidents that made commanders tighten rules and make drills longer, because a rough field and a hungry engine will kill a careless man. Ground loops and torque rolls and compressibility were the names of danger. And they taught men to respect the push of air and the bite of prop and the way the world changes when speed grows big. A young pilot put it in plain words. It felt like being strapped to a big, angry engine, and that phrase is a rough map of what they learned. The plane is power, and you must direct it, not be carried by it. The training losses were names on a list, and each loss made the ones left read maps and checklists with more care. Hard lessons are the teacher that will save lives later. Then the sea air changed, and the first fights in April 1943 proved a mix of fear and strange promise. And when a battered Spitfire walked back to its hangar with skin torn, an engine still ticking, the men who saw it under lamps learned from metal and scrap as much as from words. On May 4th, a plane showed more than 100 hits, and yet the Merlin still turned. The pilot got out, and the crew counted shells and wrote them down, and those marks became proof that the plane was built to take blows and give a man back. Mechanics marked where the ribs had held, and where they must add metal, and design notes moved from the field to the drawing board like a quick river. The sight was not romance, but hard evidence, value in a machine that could be hit and yet keep heart. June closed in with a small, fierce tale that men told again and again, and a plane came back more whole than skin, and the pilot who landed it told a story that made engineers stand tall and made enemies take notes. And when you hear that story, you feel the weight of each second. The attacker came like sun. The tracer braided and the canopy broke, the panel burned, and the pilot fought with throttle and sight and the thin mercy of the machine. And when the enemy taxied away empty, he saluted a man who had not fallen. On the ground, the chief counted more than 200 marks, and the report went to the foreman and to the commander, and the shape of what men could expect changed in one return. The enemy's laugh turned to a quiet that night, because a machine that should have fallen had not fallen, and that truth makes new rules. From that day, the tactic changed like a tide. Pilots learned to use height as money, to buy speed and spend it in a single fast strike, and the boom and zoom became a short, strong law. Climb high, dive fast, fire short, and climb away. The Spitfire's guns were taught to meet in a small zone, and the pilot's hand counted 2 seconds, and in that precise act, many fights ended before the enemy could reply. The sound of that fire, piano of many bullets, became a noise the foe learned to fear, and the math of rounds and belts and muzzle speed made simple truth. Massed, short fire kills where long turning wastes chance. Men learned a new dance with gravity and metal. As the year rolled, the plane learned more tricks. New prop blades made response cleaner. Wing tanks let them fly far and still fight. Rockets and bombs turned a fighter into a hammer for roads and trains. And the machine that once looked small now shaped whole fields. On D-Day, the sky was thick with planes. Rockets rose and hit. Roads stopped, and the sea took men to shore under a shield the Spitfires helped hold, because a plan that is built and fed and trained becomes stronger than a plan that trusts only chance. The smell of cordite and diesel and the sight of smoke where roads once moved are the proof of what craft can do. The factories are a slow thunder beneath the war. Men and women make frames and rivets and fit wires, and assembly lines push out planes, so loss becomes a number you can meet again and again, and this steady churn is a kind of victory in itself. Castle Bromwich and satellite yards become muscles that feed the field, and depots that move barrels and hubs forward make surprise less sharp and persistence more deadly. Ammunition piles and fuel trucks are the veins of the fight, and when supply runs steady, the enemy finds attrition a bitter thing to bear. The industrial drum keeps time for the pilots. Depots work nights under cold lamps to put planes back into the sky. And the skill of these men and women matters as much as a single brave hand at the stick, because a squadron that flies tomorrow is worth more than a hero lost today. Operation strikes may smash hangars, but if the supply chain moves fast, shock passes and presence returns. and that return blunts what surprise can do. The quiet hands with wrenches are the true first line of recovery. The pilot who signs his log the next morning owes life to those hands. Late in the war, the enemy brings jets and other speed, and the sky changes again. But craft keeps finding answers because men tune engines and props and teach pilots new windows and timing. And some jets fall to careful timing as pilots press the moment. Adapting the machine, and the man keeps value even against new threats, and the workshops turn to new maps and new parts under the same lamplight. War is a race of tool and test, and the old maps get redrawn. All this is costly, and the tally of loss is a slow, hard thing. Names, empty seats, families changed, nights of mourning, and a long list of men who did not come home. We tell the story with respect for those names, and with gratitude for the hands that built and fixed and kept planes flying, because their work saved other lives and made the difference in the end. The pride in craft is mixed with the sorrow for cost. At last the sky is different, and the map below shows the change, and old enemies speak of how the line of spares and the steady training turned the edge away from them, and historians will read the papers and find the numbers, and veterans will say what their ears still hear, the bite of prop and the braid of tracer. The simple truth is that craft and steady work remake war. The closing shot must be small and heavy, a Spitfire under a museum lamp, Merlin still, prop at rest, Hispano muzzles dark, and a gun camera reel in a case. A child can see it, and a veteran can touch it, and the memory of sound is the lesson. Steady hands and brave hearts together changed the sky, and the thunder spoke a new rule. June had been hard, and the men at Manston learned the Spitfire like a new song. They sat in cold cockpits and listened to the Merlin engine like a chest that breathes, and the work of dynos and charts at Boscombe Down taught where the engine would pull, and where the pilot must be careful. The machines were new and strong, but they had moods, and the instructors made pilots repeat climbs and dives until the move was not thought but muscle, because muscle saves lives when the sky gets sudden and loud. The prop lever is a small stick under a gloved thumb, and learning its click is like learning to breathe at a new pace. And men felt the weight of the helmet press hard as they learned to trust paper charts and the seat under them. In training, there were dark lists of loss, and the squadron mess kept the names, and commanders tightened rules because grief makes the school harder, but safer. The sound of late nights in the hangar, lamps, spanners, notebooks, became the secret part of each pilot's armour, the quiet craft behind a loud fight. The first patrols over the Channel taught a cruel truth. Luftwaffe pilots tried to drag the Spitfires into old fights, and some of our planes fell because the old tricks still worked if you let them, and the logs for April and May show both loss and stubborn life. Some Spitfires returned with skin full of holes, and the men who saw them under lamps could not speak at once for the sight, and the engine that should have died kept its heartbeat, and the plane rolled in slow to sit on the strip. On May 4th, a battered plane taxied home with a canopy like spiderglass and a panel that had been hot, and the pilot who climbed down smelled oil and smoke and tasted fear and relief in one breath. Mechanics knelt under lights and counted holes and hushed as they wrote numbers that would be answers, the notes going back to Castle Bromwich, even as the men fixed what they could that night. That battered return was a lesson handed in metal. The Spitfire could be hit and still bring a man back if the parts were right and the pilot kept cool. The Merlin engine is a big, warm heart, and when it pulls at height, a man thinks he has more time, and the two-stage supercharger maps from Boscombe Down were the maps the pilots learned by heart so they could put power where it saved their life. The prop is like a friend that must be asked to bite, and the Rotol governor is the lamp that makes the prop obey, and the pilot's thumb moves these levers in a small, steady prayer. When the engine sings in the thin air, the pilot feels less alone and more capable, and small needles on a dash give him the moment to dive or to pull up. The cockpit is a small, secret world, leather, cold metal, and a faint smell of fuel. And that small world must be kept calm while the sky shouts. Men in the hangars did the work that turned loss into a lesson, and every hole counted meant a new doubler plate and a reroute of a cable so the next plane would take the same hit and keep flying. And that night, work is as much a part of the fight as the fighting itself. The chief on the line reads the pattern of holes, and his hand knows where to make the fix. And his fix will save the next man who climbs in the cockpit. The modest acts of wrenches and rivets are the small gods of survival. The depot turns a wounded bird into a bird that can fly again, and the speed of that turn makes surprise less sharp and the long fight more bearable. When a pilot signs his log after a short hop, he is also signing the names of the hands that kept his plane alive. June 26 was a thin, loud day for one man when tracer and shrapnel turned his cockpit into a cage of fire and glass, and he still brought the plane home, and that story spread down the lines and changed how men thought of the airframe. The attack came from sun, and the shell came in a terrible, very small scream, and the canopy spidered and oil washed the glass. The panel bloomed with heat, and the pilot tasted metal and smoke and the salt of his fear. He pushed the Merlin with hands that knew the chart, and he prayed with a short, steady prayer to a friend called Gear, and the plane answered with the stubborn beat of the engine that would not quit. When the enemy came in low and saw the battered bird limp away, they changed the radio from mockery to a low, stunned silence, because a man and a craft that survived that are no longer mere targets, but a new kind of force. That return taught new rules, and the pilots learned from it fast. They stopped trying to match the enemy in a dance of turns and instead climbed, and they let speed and the well-timed bite of the prop do the sharp work, and the boom and zoom grew like a short, hard hymn sung by many planes. Climb, set prop, dive, 2 seconds of shot, and climb away became a taught thing so many could do the same. The idea is simple, but the doing is exact. The gunner's belts must be right, the convergence must be set so the tracers meet. The pilot must take the speed and give the bullets a short, final home. When the burst lands, it is quick and terrible, and often final. The sound of the guns is like a piano played angry and fast, and when many pianos play the chords together, the sky hears the thunder. The enemy wrote later of that sound and called it fearful, and the men who did the shooting called it the tool that ends the fight. Each Spitfire carried rounds counted and spares stacked, and the gunners learned mixes that punched and burned where needed, and the math of rounds and rates made the strike both precise and cruel. The camera of a gun captures the braid of tracer like threads, and the film shows the instant a wing tears, and men on both sides told the same small, sharp truth. The right burst at the right moment ends a plane. That is cold, but it is the truth of combat. As the planes learned new tricks, the workshops learned new answers, broader blades that bite faster, tanks that live in the wing so the plane can go far, racks that hold rockets like iron teeth to bite roads and trains, and pilots learned to change roles fast from guard to hammer. The Spitfire that once seemed a small hunter became a field shaper, and on D-Day, the sky was full of planes that cut movement and let men cross beaches with fewer dangers. The smell of burning rubber and the smoke on the roads are a direct answer to the work of men in sheds who bolted racks and set fuse. The war grew larger, but the answer was the same. Craft first, courage next. Factories hummed like a second engine behind the front, and a steady line of parts and hands meant that loss could be met not by sorrow, but by a new plane on the next day, and that steadiness is the real weight of victory. Castle Bromwich and other yards laid out parts, and the lines moved like a slow river, and women and men fit skins and wires with tired but steady hands. The plane becomes many hands, and its life is all those hands together. Ammunition and fuel move like arteries, and when they are full, the wing can keep the pressure on, and the enemy finds that killing a plane is not the same as killing a force. The long war is, at root, numbers and care. Depots work through night and repair with a speed that turns surprise into annoyance, and when a squadron flies again the next day, it flies because someone held the lamp and turned a wrench and did it with care. Operation strikes may smash hangars, but if the chain of parts keeps flowing, the blow does not last, and that is the cruel truth men learned. Endurance beats a single strike. The quiet hands with grease across the palm are the slow army that wins the air. When the enemy brought jets, The lesson did not end, because speed and craft changed the test. Men tune engines and props, and pilots learn to use context and timing to catch speed with mass and timing. And sometimes the quiet trick wins. You cannot stop change, but you can meet it with good tools and steady heads, and workshops keep changing the tools fast. The sky becomes a place of new rules, and men learn again how to make a second advantage from small acts. All of this is costly, and the list of names is heavy, and the stories we tell hold both the pride for craft and the sadness for the cost, and we must keep both in the telling. Training cost men, combat cost more, and the hands that fixed planes mourn, and also know they saved lives by saving planes. The record must be plain about loss, and plain about the small acts that saved other lives. The songs of victory are mixed with a quiet bell for the dead. Then the sky changes, and the map below shows the shift, and men in other lands read the dispatches and know the new fact. Steady supply and trained hands and tuned machines make presence, and that presence wins. Old enemies looked at the ledger and later said so plainly: mass, craft, training beat lone brilliance, and that is a lesson that cost many men to learn. The historian keeps the charts and the mechanic keeps the notes, and both tell the same truth. Craft changes war. Small acts make the loud story. A chart penciled, a hub measured, a belt mixed, a pilot signed off for flight, and these repeat until a plane acts like another plane, and commanders can trust the number. The camera loves these ritual acts because they make the loud thing happen again and again, and the grand battle scenes rest on small, sure work. The quiet is the engine of the loud. At last, the museum light shows the plane quiet, and the sound is memory, not heat, and a child can stand and look and ask what it was, and a veteran can touch and remember, and the lesson is plain. Craft, steady hands and brave hearts changed the sky, and the thunder spoke, and the world learned a new rule. June 26, 1943, begins like a drumbeat in the sky, and the sun is a hard knife on the clouds as squadron leader James Thompson leads his flight out over the channel, engines humming like big hearts under each wing, while men in cockpits feel the leather of helmets press, the oxygen breath soft and steady, and the metal world around them smells of oil and hot canvas. In the open air, the Spitfires look bright and small, their Merlin engines singing through two-stage superchargers, Rotol props ticking when pilots set the pitch, and the men in those small boxes know that today will be a schoolroom for danger. The German fighters come like a shadow, and then a flash, diving from sun, and the calm of the morning breaks into the sharp sound of guns. A pilot hears that sound, and his chest tightens, and his hands move in a pattern learned in long hours of practice because the instrument and the man are one now. This is the hour a lesson begins that will be written in torn metal and shivered nerves. Thompson feels his helmet tug as the first shock hits, and the canopy above him turns to a web of glass and light, while hot oil paints a smear across his little window so he can barely see the sky for a breath. The smell of burning wires and fuel hits first, then a small cold fear that sits under the ribs and makes his hands find the levers. The Merlin keeps its steady pulse, and the instruments blink and bite with numbers that mean life or end, and he reads them like a map while the world around him screams with metal on metal. His left hand moves the prop lever, his right keeps the stick level. His foot finds rudder with a practiced, soft push, and every move is a small prayer to metal and skill. He tastes smoke and salt, and a small, dark thought crosses his mind. But the training is muscle now, and the muscle keeps the plane flying. In a cockpit that is full of flame and alarm, the pilot is both soldier and careful mechanic. Rains of 20 mm 303 tear the skin of the plane like a furious wind, and holes bloom in the wing and fuselage so fast that light pours through where there was metal, and the sound of each hit is a tiny hammer in the bone. Control runs sing when ropes are cut, and the feel of the stick changes. A twitch that must be felt and answered. And Thompson realizes his aileron and elevator are now soft in a way they were not a minute before. The fuel line drinks a dark drop, and the engine coughs once, then keeps going on a stubborn rhythm that feels like a lifeline, and the man uses that rhythm like a second heart to pace his return. He fights the pull of gravity and the song of a wounded prop, and he keeps his eyes on the small round sight, where the world is a dot and threats are numbers. Each second is long and heavy, and he holds on. The canopy shatters with a clear, bright crack, and the wind comes in like a flood, and the taste of metal and blood is close and sharp. And for a breath, he thinks of small things: home, light at the mess, a name, and then he makes a choice to keep flying because the plane still answers, and the sky is the only road he has. His left hand keeps feel of the throttle, and his right searches the switches for a pump or a blower, and he turns knobs with a slow touch that is full of care, because a wrong twist can end all. Smoke trails the cockpit like a small grey river, and he wipes a hand at his face, and his fingers come away black with oil and fear. And yet he keeps his voice calm on the radio, and says the small things a man must say so that others know he is still there. The quiet in his voice is a shield. The loud noise outside is melted metal and the harsh math of war. 3 of the 4 main longerons are pierced, and the metal frame is a map of small holes, and yet the structure holds like a stubborn friend that will not let go. And the design that looks heavy and clumsy in pictures shows its true self now. It keeps a man inside when violence comes. The radial Merlin sits in front like a stubborn heart and keeps pumping, and the pilot learns quickly that an engine that keeps running is the mercy of a machine. Mechanics will later look at the torn skin and will say the words engineer's love, load path, doubler, stress, and they will change the metal because the metal can be made stronger in the right place. For Thompson, thinking of sums and stress is not his work now. His work is to keep the stick steady, to time his breath to the engine, and to coax the plane like a patient animal toward a strip that is home. Below, the enemy pilot who fired watches the black thing come limping with a size that says broken, and he expects the fall, but the bird keeps minute after minute of thin, steady motion, and the German sees a machine that should not fly still moving like a stubborn stone. He empties belts and marvels, and for a moment the laugh is gone, and only the low noise of engines fills the net, a silence heavy with surprise. In that silence, the enemy salutes and turns away, not cruel but stunned, and the salute is a small human act that says what the guns cannot. Respect. The fact that a man and a machine could survive such a storm changes a mind in a small, honest way that reports and books later will try to measure. The enemy pilot flies back with the taste of confusion in his mouth. Thompson brings the plane in on one good engine and a tremor in the controls and lands like a man who walks through a storm and finds his town whole. And when the wheels touch the strip, the air is a very loud thing, and the crew runs with lamps and blankets and hands that know how to patch a life. Under the hot lamps, the chief pulls numbers from skin and panel and counts more than 100 marks, and his hand shakes, and he says a prayer he does not say at the briefings. The men who fix planes look at the pattern, and they learn, and they write change notices that will change another plane before the next dawn, because they do not want the next man to have the same close call. The return becomes proof that designs and hands can save lives, and that the sky will listen to those who learn. Word travels fast in squads and in mess halls, and the story of the man who came back from the dead becomes a small seed that grows into new rules and new hope, because men now have proof that the plane can eat hits and still give a man home. The squadron talks quiet around tables, and the old jokes fall away, replaced by charts and a new respect for a machine that was once mocked as clumsy. The pilot who came back speaks softly at first, and then he tells the facts. Where the hits landed, how the engine behaved, what the gauge said at the worst moment, and the young men write it down with the hungry hope that such knowledge will save them. In the hangar the wrenches move faster, and the foremen stamp new plates, and the armourers change belts, and the plane grows a little tougher for the next fight. The change is not only in one squadron, but across many fields, and the story goes to Castle Bromwich and the testing halls, where men study the holes and the stresses, and make parts that are kinder to a bullet and kinder to a man. Engineers draw lines and call for more doublers and rerouted cables, and the factory answers with a steady rhythm like a second engine making parts that matter. The work is not as loud as combat, but it is steady, and it saves more lives than any one brave act. Small acts of craft add up until they change the map of the war, and the man who landed a shredded plane becomes a teacher by accident. The enemy takes note in short, sharp reports, and the net fills with less laughter and more careful measures, and men who once mocked now make new plans, because a plane that should fall did not fall, and that recalculation changes the day. The enemy commanders mark the names of such returns, and their tone changes in small, cold ways, and the quiet of the night is full of rethought orders. War is a ledger of small facts, and the ledger took a new line that day. The sky is an honest judge, and it had shown a new truth. Pilots who survived that day learned to treat the engine like a friend, and the prop like a muscle, and the maps on the kneeboard like a sacred text. And they breathe in a new way at takeoff, because they know the thin, precise points that keep a man alive. The small rituals before a sortie, the check of the magnetos, the feel of the prop, the smell of oil, are the small prayers that shape a good day, and men do them with a care that is fierce. When a man flies with such care, the machine obeys like a loyal thing, and the pilot's heart matches the engine's beat. That small match of pulse to piston is the learning of an entire squadron. In the years after that one return, the story was told in pilots' rooms, and in reports, and in the quiet halls where men study film. And when new tactics spread, many men learned not to meet the enemy in turns, but to meet them with speed and short bursts and careful escape. The doctrine that grows from facts is patient and greedy for proof, and the plane that once seemed only to carry a mock now carries the weight of a new plan. The sound of gunfire still breaks men's ears, but now they know how to make the noise count, and how to make the noise stop at the right time. What once was a gamble becomes a taut move. When we look back at that day, we see a man and a machine in a small, perfect test of what craft can do, and we see the hands in the hangar and the pens in the offices that change parts, and a schedule that kept planes whole. The lesson is not only about one courage, but about the quiet work that made courage repeatable. Charts, clamps, belts, and men who worked at lamps to turn a broken plane into a bird that flies again. The man who came home is a small hero, but he is also the proof that craft and courage together make a new rule in the sky. The story stays with us because it is both rough and true. The final image must be plain. Under a lamp, a mechanic counts holes and writes a note. A pilot signs his name in the log with a hand that still shakes a little. And a child who sees the old film will ask what the noise was and be told that it was thunder, and that men made thunder into a tool with their hands. The plane under museum glass is quiet now, and the engine sleeps, but the memory of a man and a machine in that thin, bright air is loud and clear. The lesson of that day is this: small acts of care, and a stubborn, steady machine can bring a man home from the dark and change the face of a war. The sky opens like a drum, and the planes climb into it, engines thumping like great steady hearts, while men in helmets count breaths and watch needles on tiny dials. And in that long, thin blue, the pilots learn one rule: climb high, make speed, and keep power in reserve, because power is the coin that buys the short, sharp moment that ends a fight. They set propellers to bite. They feel the lever click under a gloved thumb, and the Rotol blades pull them like oars in an invisible sea of air. The pilot smells oil and sweat, hears the muffled world through his oxygen, and the machine answers him like a loyal friend, heart loud and steady. The tactic is simple and brutal. Use height as a store of energy, drop it into speed, aim the guns where they all meet, fire a short burst, and then climb away while the enemy is still stunned. The men teach this in long hours on ranges and in rooms with charts, making muscle memory the pilot's shield. What looks like a small moment is really the sum of many small acts learned in hangars and on benches. The guns are not one voice but a chorus. 8 small mouths that speak together and make a sound like thunder when they open at the same time. And the Spitfire's weapons are tuned so that the tracers meet in a single bright braid at the place the sight points to. Armourers mix belts with care, some bullets to punch, some to burn, some to shine so the pilot can see the path, and they load them by hand until the weight feels right and the belts feed smooth. The idea of convergence is this: set the guns so their fire meets at a small space ahead, and that small space becomes the killing place where metal meets metal with terrible truth. Pilots learn to hold steady on that point. The burst is short, 2 or 3 seconds, because waste does not win fights. The math of fire becomes a simple poem. A focused burst is a small effort that gives big results. On the dive, the plane turns into a spear of sound, and the pilot feels the speed in his bones and the pressure on his chest, and the way the needle climbs as the engine drinks wind and gives back a howl. This is the moment when energy becomes violence and the chorus opens. The sight holds the tiny world of a target. The pilot breathes in and times the release, and then all the guns speak together with one terrible voice. The concussion is felt more than heard for the man inside, a deep push like a drumbeat that answers his own heartbeat. In the gun camera, the tracers braid like threads, and the film makes the moment clear for men on the ground and in rooms with maps. For the enemy, it is sudden. For the shooter, it is short, precise, and planned. The belts and the mix matter like a recipe. Some rounds are heavy and bite like a hammer, others burn and make fire, and the tracers show the path so the pilot can correct in the blink after the burst. Armourers at Manston learned which combinations make the right wound in metal and which rounds make the engine choke. Their tables and notes are a kind of law. The Spitfire carries rounds for each gun, and every pilot knows roughly how many shots he can spare before the clips are empty. And that knowledge makes him sting like a small animal and then hide. The weapons are tools made true by men who count and test and sweat under lamps. Precision wins more than fury. When many planes join, the chorus becomes a wall, and the noise is not a single scream, but a thick band of sound that sweeps the sky and tears metal like paper where it hits a thin seam. Formation discipline makes the burst happen in the same place from many guns at once, and the result is sudden structure failure on the enemy's plane. The pilot sees a tail flutter or a wing flex and knows the fight is done. The gun camera confirms the lesson, and the report goes straight back to the squadron and to the workshop. The enemy who expected a fair fight now finds a calculated storm, and their surprise becomes hesitation. Tactical math beats bravado when many small acts are done correctly together. The physics is simple if you know the terms. Muzzle speed is how fast a bullet leaves the gun, convergence is where the guns aim to meet, and belt mix is the recipe of metal and fire. Pair these with height and speed, and you have a formula that turns chance into choice. Men with charts taught pilots the right windows, the right height, the right speed. So the pilot does not hope but follows a timed move. The pilot's hand is steady because it has done this many times in training, and the 2-second burst is a tiny machine of violence that saves lives because it ends fights quickly. When a squadron acts like a single mind, the sky changes its rules. The first big raids showed this clearly. When Spitfires hunted over Bremen and Hamburg, they used speed and focused bursts to break escort fighters and to clear paths for other planes, and witnesses wrote later of planes unroofed and torn in moments. The gun camera reels filled and intelligence read them and changed plans, and men in other camps who once sneered found their laughs small. The effect is both visible and mechanical. Metal shears, control runs, snap, and the bird tumbles like a puppet with cut strings. The moment is sharp and final, and the cost on both sides is heavy and honest. The pilot feels all of this inside his chest. The weight of the helmet, the muffled sound of the cockpit, the smell of hot oil and sweat, the little tremor of fear that sharpens his hand, and the discipline that turns that tremor into a steady cut. The cockpit is a tight world where small gestures count, a blink, a breath, a thumb on the prop, and those gestures are practiced until they are muscle and not thought. When the burst comes, the man is both calm and keen, his heart long and steady, before and short and sharp during the decision. That rhythm is the music of survival. Mechanics and armourers make the chorus possible. They set timing, clear hubs, and feed belts so that guns do not jam in a moment that matters. And their slow work under lamps is the secret thunder that pilots bring to battle. A jam at the wrong time is a lost chance, and men sweat to keep that from happening, checking feed paths and barrel wear and belt tension. The sound of a gun firing cleanly is a praise song for the quiet hands that made it happen. When a pilot signs his log after a day, he signs not only his name, but the work of many unseen partners. In the gun camera's slow film, the braiding of Tracer looks almost beautiful. A bright rope that traces the path of fate, and when the wreckage falls, the picture is clear and final, and teaches the next man what to do and where to be. The film is studied and lessons are given and tactics become doctrine, because war is, in the end, a set of rules that you must learn and apply with care. The small bright braid becomes a lesson for many men who want to survive. The thunder changes the mind and the map. Where once pilots trusted only dogfight skill, they now learn to value numbers, height, speed, precise bursts, and the new rules spread like a calm wind through briefings and plans. The lesson is practical and unromantic. Control your energy, aim your guns, and get out. The craft turns what looks like chaos into a small, repeatable act of power. Men prefer truth to myth when their lives are at stake. On cold nights, the pilots talk low, and the armourers laugh soft, and the film reels roll as proof, and the song of the guns becomes a hymn in their memory, a hard music that saved friends and ended fights. They speak of the noise and of the strange stillness that follows a burst. And their voices are careful, because they have seen machines and men torn by the sound. The memory is part pride and part sorrow, and they keep both. When new planes come and the air grows faster, the same rules bend but do not break. Convergence still matters, belts still must feed, and the pilot's steady hand is still the final instrument that makes the burst true. Tools change and men learn, but the idea of a short, precise strike remains a constant that can be taught and repeated. The sky's music shifts, but its math stays true. In the final quiet scene, a child might see only an old film of Tracer and a shiny plane in a museum and feel nothing more than wonder. But the veteran sees the braid and remembers the short, hard flash and the men who kept the tools sharp. And the lesson is both simple and heavy. Ordered, repeated craft makes thunder that can change a war. The chorus of guns is not a song of joy, but a stern, exact instrument. And the men who taught it into being knew its cost and kept its rule. June 1944. And the sky looks like a chessboard where rooks and knights once flew, and the Spitfire that learned to guard bombers now learns to break roads and stop armies. Wings fitted with tanks like extra lungs, props tuned to snap the plane into speed, rockets hung like iron teeth under the wings, and each change is a small act of craft that widens the map a pilot can reach. Pilots feel the new weight and new power at takeoff. The helmet presses hard, the engine hums like a big steady heart. The smell of fuel mixes with sweat, and the cockpit is a tight world where small levers and gauges mean life, and the man and the machine must learn the same new song. Rotol props and variable pitch blades give cleaner bite when the pilot calls for it, and the lever under the thumb becomes a promise that the plane will answer when speed is needed and will climb when the time comes. Wing tanks let the Spitfire travel far to meet bombers or chase targets deep inside enemy land, and pilots learn to jettison them at the right moment so the plane is light and sharp for the fight. These changes are not magic. They are the slow work of men under lamps who tune parts, check clearances, and make the aircraft obey the hand that flies it. The Rotol props change the rhythm of the fight because they make the plane bite the air faster, and what felt like a long reach becomes a quick strike, and pilots feel that in their bones when the engine surges and the world presses back in a tidy, powerful roar. The Merlin or Griffin engine, the heart, answers the throttle like a patient drum, and every pilot learns to time his moves to that pulse, because the right push gives speed and the wrong push makes trouble. The prop governor, set by a mechanic with a feeler gauge and a lamp, is a small, exact thing that keeps the blade from hesitating when the pilot needs it. This small certainty turns danger into a planned moment. When a Spitfire stoops, the blades bite and the plane becomes a streak, and the pilot sees the target as a small dot and breathes a short, careful breath before the burst. The craft of the hangar shows in that clear snap of the prop, and a pilot never forgets the sound. Wing tanks are a simple and heavy gift, steel and rubber bolted to the wing. They carry extra fuel so a Spitfire can go far to meet a bomber or a convoy, and pilots learn to fly with that weight and to drop it away when the fight turns near and sharp. The change shifts the plane's center, and the man inside must feel the weight and correct with small trim and small movements so the plane stays steady until the tank is jettisoned and the air opens. The sight of hundreds of Spitfires with tanks hooked for reach is a sight of patience turned into muscle, and on D-Day, that patience becomes a shield for men landing on beaches. Mechanics watch the tanks for leaks and spares, and their simple checks mean the difference between a safe return and a night of loss. The work is humble, but it is the backbone of long reach. Rockets and bombs change how a fighter thinks of the ground, and the sight of RP-3 rails under the wing is the sight of a new teeth set, an ability to break a bridge or stop a rolling convoy as surely as a gun can end a dogfight. Pilots learn to time rocket release and cannon bursts so that the planes hit the right line at the right second, and they learn to read the ground and the map like a surgeon reads an X-ray. Bomb racks that carry 250 or 500-pound weapons give a Spitfire a blunt voice to shape the land and the enemy's chance to move, and the careful loading by armourers and the checks by crews make these heavy words safe to speak. The result is that a fighter becomes an iron hammer for the army, a fast maker of holes in the enemy map. The pilot who drops a rocket also carries the worry of what will happen below, and he watches thick smoke like a judge watches a verdict. Training for this multi-role fight is a long, steady drum, and pilots sit in briefings with maps and charts and learn new timing and new rhythm, because a Spitfire pilot must now think as escort, as hunter, as striker, and each role has its own small math. The weight of the helmet and the cold hiss of oxygen are the same, but the job changes, and a man must learn not only how to fire his guns, but how to time a rocket salvo and how to drop wing tanks clean. Flight hours grow long, and the instructors push until the hands move on their own and the throat grows steady when the alarm sounds. This is discipline turned into habit. The pilot's chest is both drum and ledger. He measures his breath against the engine pulse and his fear against a checklist. Small gestures like a steady thumb on the prop lever and a calm read of the altimeter become the measures of life. D-Day is the day when all the small acts meet, at a scale that is hard to imagine. Hundreds of Spitfires layer the sky, some with tanks for reach, some with rockets to blast lines, and the air fills with the low roar of engines like a sea. The pilots check their lists with quiet hands, prop, mag, fuel, and the ground crews push machines into the long dance of waves. And when the rockets fire, the roads and bridges smoke, and the enemy loses the only thing that moves armies: time. The sight of columns stopped by fire is both terrible and decisive, and the pilot who watched a map and pulled a lever can see the effect of his small, exact act stretched into a shoreline outcome. Repairs happen fast. The depots keep planes flying with parts and hands, so pressure does not stop. D-Day shows that craft and scale together move armies. On the ground the sound is heavy, and the men who move the parts keep the field alive, and depots are the quiet, strong place where planes come to become whole again, and the speed of repair is like a shield that never sleeps. The team under the lamp is a chain that tightens and releases and moves a plane back into the fight. Their quick hands and the supply lines that bring barrels and hubs mean a squadron can be there again tomorrow. The pilot who does the loud act of striking trusts the quiet men who fix his plane, and his calm at briefing is often confidence in hands he cannot see. When a strike breaks a convoy, a depot man far away can still feel the result of his late-night work as good and true. The iron hammer role is not only machines, it is also a story of men who step in and do the heavy duty, and the price is heavy. Pilots fall, the hangars are quiet for a night, and the long math of loss is a ledger on many desks, and each man lost is a quiet bell. But the work of craft saves more lives over time, because a steady chain of spares and training keeps wings in the sky and keeps the enemy from moving. Victory is not only a loud day, but the sum of long nights in depots and long runs of training and the courage to show up again. The cost is real, and it shapes the face of memory. The Spitfire's change is also a change in voice. Once a nimble defender in dogfight, now a shape changer that can be escort, hunter, and hammer, and pilots who once prized turning fight learn to value speed and short, precise force and the sweet small number of 2 seconds on a burst. The machine's heart is the engine that gives tempo, and the pilot's hands are the nerves that move it, and when they act in the same rhythm, the plane becomes more than metal. The tactic is taught and repeated, and the result is not luck but a reliable tool for the army. The sky becomes a place where craft decides passage. Enemy troops learn to fear the new noise, because rockets and cannon make a sound that means movement will stop, and the morale of an army that cannot move is cracked. Letters and reports later speak of panic in columns and nights that never end. The small exact act of a pilot firing a rocket can have a weight like a storm on a road, and commanders watch maps change in smoke. The psychological effect is as real as the holes in metal, because armies depend on time and motion, and when those vanish, the fight shifts. The Spitfire's hammer is not only iron, but a quiet terror of movement that the enemy must solve or be trapped. Tech keeps changing, and hands keep working. Variable pitch props, fuel injection tweaks, new rocket rails, and later Griffin engines for higher ceiling all arrive in small parcels to hangars, and the men in sheds make them into truth by bolts and tests, and nights of careful work. Each small upgrade is a tiny advantage, summed across hundreds of planes, and that sum becomes a turning number. Pilots feel each change at the stick, and the engine's new note is a familiar friend that gives them a second more to live. The workshop's slow music is the long note behind victory. In late fights when jets and fast things arrive, the Spitfire family still finds a place because trained pilots and tuned machines can use timing and mass to make a strike, and some pilots learn to catch jets in the right window, turning speed against itself. The work of adaptation never stops, and the race of tools and tests continues under lamps and on ranges. The lesson is old and new. Tools must be fit, and men must be taught. The sky's rules bend, but do not break when craft is steady. When the war ends, the Spitfire stands in memory as a machine that grew wings and teeth and a mind, and the final image is both quiet and loud, a plane under a lamp in a museum, Merlin quiet, rockets removed, props still, but the memory of its bite and the braid of tracer on old film remain like a song. The child who sees it will ask, and the old pilot will answer with a small, steady voice about the weight of the helmet and the sound of the engine and the smell of oil, and the lesson will be passed on. This is a story of small acts done again and again until scale becomes power, and the craft that turned escort into iron hammer changed more than the map. It changed the way men think of what a simple machine can do.